Let me talk about vaccines for those not from the medical side. Vaccines really fake out the immune system to really inform the host, if you will, that you have had the disease without producing the disease. And with that, immunity is developed and you're protected from subsequent diseases. And everyone in this room has received large number of vaccines for a variety of infectious diseases that were common certainly in my parents' lifetime and indeed during my training. So a lot of these diseases that now are essentially eliminated because of vaccines, and so they've been remarkably effective at eliminating disease. Now the good side of that is they're remarkably effective in eliminating disease. The bad side about that is that they're very good at eliminating disease, and when the disease doesn't exist, no one cares about it, and all they say is it hurts kids' arms when you get injected. All you have to do is see one case of polio, diphtheria, or whooping cough, or any of these diseases that we're protected from, not to mention smallpox, and you would go back over and over again to get vaccines. But when they're not there, the social value of them becomes a social harm. That is, it hurts. My kid cries for a day after he gets the vaccines, they get a little fever, etc. And without ever seeing diphtheria, people don't realize the value of a diphtheria immunization. So it's an interesting social problem. And again, it goes back to my tenet, as I've learned over the years, and this is something new for me that I should pass on to you, is that we really don't do very well as a society in long-term prevention activities, be it pollution or traffic or whatever it may be. If things move slowly, especially, we can't deal with them well, and we don't put the resources in to take care of them. But we do things from the therapeutic side. When people get sick, it's right there. We can invest huge amounts of money. And ultimately, that's what drives the pharmaceutical industry. And when it comes to vaccines, that's what we're talking about. So I'll get into that in a bit. Just some examples here of vaccine-preventable diseases. On the left, you see diphtheria, whooping cough, measles, and polio crashing down until the 40s and 50s. And then you see the right side here of HIV/AIDS coming up. And it always has a dip at the end, but it continues to go up. This is just, this is mortality, actually death, not just cases. AIDS continues to be devastating around the world. This is just an example of HIV/AIDS, where it is around the world. I've worked with essentially all the most dangerous viruses during my career, and there's nothing like HIV. There's really no human virus that kills essentially everyone that it infects, first of all. So the actual consequences of an infection are horrid. But worse, it's remarkable how invasive a relatively difficult to transmit virus that only transmits by sex or sharing of blood or from mother to infant. It's remarkable how this has invaded populations around the world. And sub-Saharan Africa right now, with 20–30% of the adult population infected with 100% fatal disease, is a huge social problem that even George W. Bush recognizes at this point. This is just an example of the social disruption in southern Africa. The orphans from AIDS are expected by the year 2010 that 1 in 7 kids under the age of 15 will have lost a parent to AIDS in Africa. And for those who've been in the developing world, when that happens, you're in deep trouble because there is no social network, and those kids are on the street and have to do other things, be they prostitution or join a variety of revolutionary armies and the like to get a job, and they can be influenced, and it'll cause huge problems around the world if we don't take care of it. But the cost of this, just in the direct medical cost alone, for those of you who haven't been involved in cost-benefit analysis, this is just the cost of the medical care around the world for AIDS patients in '97. And it ignores all the lost income and the social chaos, et cetera, goes with it. But $18 billion a year, it's probably triple that by now. But it's a lot of money just to take care of HIV-infected individuals. And the only way to stop the epidemic is going to be with the vaccine, where you can train the immune system to have seen the virus before, and when the infection, the exposure to the virus happens the next time, the body's immune system fights it off and you never see the disease again. The challenges of that, notice I put business first and scientific second. I think there are scientific challenges that we've certainly seen, but I think now with our modern technology, we can build just about anything we want that's part of the AIDS virus, and we should be able to make a good imitation that can protect people from HIV, as I'll show you later, that we did in chimpanzees, but have a hard time in humans so far. But I think it's the business issue that drives that. It's a moderately expensive, cheap in terms of the overall AIDS epidemic, but moderately expensive process when it comes to a company. And as I'll show that there's competing opportunities that will essentially eat up an AIDS vaccine, and I'll show you how that's happened. Scientific challenges are considerable, but I think, again, that we can get around that. And then, ultimately, the social value that balances these two, that balances how much money one puts into scientific research to understand the virology and protection from HIV, and that would put a market out there to buy a vaccine should it be made, I think is the greatest challenge, and that if there is no social value given to something, industry will not make it. If industry doesn't make it, it doesn't get made by and large. We can do research, we can have government research, but as far as product development, it really comes from industry. So if we take $18 billion a year costs and a little less than $3.3 billion for developing a vaccine, now that doesn't sound like very much money when you put it into this, but $300 million, $280 million that have cost us, it's a lot of money. Especially for any given business, and you want to invest that and get a return. But if you did have that kind of, if you could make an AIDS vaccine for $300 million, just for 1 year's expenditure, we should have 60-some candidates of AIDS vaccines going through this development process, and we should have those candidates actually being tested. This is what has been referred to as just a pipeline of vaccine development, or a pipette that's dripping out instead of pouring out. These are the phases of vaccine development. 1 is the safety of the vaccine. Phase 2 is to see if it causes an immune response. And 3 is the big one, where you actually go out and test it in at-risk individuals, where some get a vaccine and some get a placebo. And right now there's only been 1 vaccine. It's actually 2 of ours that have gone through phase 3 studies in all the years, since 1981 when HIV was discovered. So it's been truly a pipette. And Jose Esparza is a quote here that he said this in 99, that maybe in the next 10 years we work very hard, there'll be 3 candidate vaccines in phase 3. That's about right, I'm afraid. There just aren't that many that have been developed. And is that science or is it business? I would say it's probably both, and I think ultimately it's social value for not valuing them and pushing them through. This is what it cost you, and this is the revenue from the business side. This is really a curve on the left-hand side of this, of VaxGen going out. We did private investment and ultimately went public, and these are the funding cycles of VaxGen that gets up to about, in our case, about ultimately 280, including the manufacturing facility. And then you'd have to have another blip up above that for manufacturing and marketing. And then you'd see the revenue. Now, the first 2 things in here, one is the green to show you how much it costs to make a vaccine. It is a fair amount of money, but not when you look at the overall social cost that HIV/AIDS has. And then you see the other is the delay here. When you invest this, you go for at least a decade or more before you actually cross the profit side. And that is, if you have to, everyone here is an investor by and large. Someone in your family or your some sort of investment is going on when you even keep stuff in a bank. And that investment is hopefully to have a return. And the faster you get that return, the ultimately less cost it is. When you get this kind of a long-term investment that takes decades and more, it's not very attractive, frankly, from the investment side. From the community side, it's terribly important to get a vaccine. From the investment side, it's less attractive because it takes you that much time before you get a return on your investment.